Ani bonjour, and welcome to Anishinaabemowin Word Cards. Join myself, Rochelle, and Danae while we work on improving our understanding of an important aspect of Anishinaabemowin and discuss our experiences as Anishinaabemowin learners, users, and teachers.
This is a learning journey, a starting place for further exploration. Do not mistake our enthusiasm for any kind of authority. We have learned from amazing speakers, but we make mistakes and misunderstand things.
Always check in with speakers and learners in your area to find the words and word parts that work best for you. Nahau, Bajtada. Ani Kinawia, Miigwech Bazindawiek, Rochelle Indigenous, Toronto Indida, Mioma Nuich Kiwe, Danae, Ani Anishna.
Bonjour, nin bindage gijagukwe, dishnekanago, dene indigenakaskaye, Winnipeg indigenamegwa, jikenda wabmanan, Rochelle.
So, hi everyone. I'm Rochelle, and I'm here in Toronto, and I'm here with my friend Danae. And then I think I said something you guys actually don't say. So we often say Anishna for like kind of the thing after hello, kind of like a sup.
With what up, buddy?
But after I said it, I immediately remembered that I don't think you guys say that. So I appreciate you responding.
Yes.
Even though
the world didn't fall apart when someone from a different dialect said Anishna to me. Yeah, it's funny how that works. I just kept rolling. I was like, I could have said Shago, Rochelle, which is like our version of like, what up? But we all managed to keep it together. Good for us.
Yes, just keep on going. Speaking of keeping on going, we are now in our third episode, continuing with clips from our interview with Alan Corbiere. So you've already heard him twice. And for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, we have to let you know we did have some technical difficulty when we were doing this recording. And so for the interview, we apologize to you and also to Alan that the video is not there for those of you watching on a video stream. And for those of you listening on audio, the audio quality isn't quite as good as we usually try to get it. But we just felt like you would really want to hear what he has to say because I feel like it's so important and empowering and much better than anything we could come up with. So we're going to keep on going with that. Did you have any thoughts?
I always like to express gratitude for those that know so much that are willing to share with us. And we mentioned in the last episode, we talked to Alan pretty early on in our podcast decision making, like kind of it was before we had even recorded some of the preliminary episodes, and so this conversation really helped to formulate some of those ideas that we had around what is it that we want to talk about, what is it that word parts is bringing to our life, and why it's important to us to share. So this is the gratitude we have for Ojig, and he's such a great teacher and philosophizer and educator, and a thinker of things in Anishinaabe thought, and really gives great perspective. So we hope you're enjoying this series. It's coming out over the summer. Great thing to be listening to while you're sitting outside or thinking about the language or whatever is a part of your journey this summer. This is a great series that's really helping me to really think about what it is that we're doing as learners as well.
Mm-hmm. So with that, let's get into this third part of our interview with Alan Corbiere.
You've both heard this, and I imagine your listeners will have heard this, that speakers will always say our language is so descriptive. And then that's the thing, it's the morphology that makes it descriptive. But we don't teach it that way for whatever perplexing reason. We teach it just word for word. And if we were able to actually tap into that descriptiveness, I think that would then create a momentum and an interest for some people to then say, hey, I made this up, or I was able to say this or that, and get them really learning about the morphemes. Because the other thing is they have an internal order as well, as you know, but some people don't know the order, and uh, you gotta it does take some doing. I've just been listening to I shouldn't say I listened to periodically time to time this fella. He's a Mohawk, and his name is Brian Maracle. And I first listened to him. There was a Stabilizing Indigenous Languages conference in Baraboo, Wisconsin, in the early 2000s. I forget exactly when. Anyway, a van load of us went down there to Baraboo, and we participated in that conference. So I thought, oh, I'll check this guy out. And he just made a more or less, I think it was a 2x8 board, and then he put a lip under it, and he had it at a slight angle, and then he just had all these morphemes that were like just say the size of a thing like this, and then the exercise was to put them in their right order. So that was for he just taught adults, and he says, here's how you're going to actually construct a word and using these morphemes. So that was I was all switched on to that, and I thought, okay, well, we'll do that too, and that's what we did with the ARP thing. Like that Quizlet was actually for a while was made. My coworker, female MacGyver there, she just used a three ring binder, and she put those in there. So we were limited to three morphemes, and then flipping them around, and then you could see that they all actually made one word, no matter which one you turned up. And of course, we had to control that, but you actually end up. So the kids were reading this and looking at this was grade 3. So then they would, like, for the example that I was talking about, it get walk, and then that would be the initial, and then mish would be the initial, and then the body part would be the medial, meaning nick or got or whatever, and then or e would be the ending. So then they would be able to play with those around. They would see, okay, this is actually making words and stuff. So anyway, I kind of took that from Brian, and then recently I got back in touch with him because I went and sat in on his Mohawk immersion class as well. Didn't understand anything at all, but I spent the day there just to see what they do and how they do it and stuff. But I recently got his notes to the Office of the Commissioner of Indigenous Languages. I guess this commissioner, they ended up asking Brian about his reflections on language revitalization. So then he said that, you seem to be stuck again on the idea that it's the schools that are going to do it. But there is room for improvement in the schools. But he says, I think that the real part that can really stick and hold, he says, is actually teaching young adults. And he says, I've done that for, I forget how many years, at least 20, if not 30 years. And he says, this ain't a matchmaking service, but he says a number of the young people that come through the program ended up hooking up, and they have kids. And the goal is to secure intergenerational transmission. And now these two that hooked up, that are speakers, second language speakers, they just speak Mohawk to their kids. And so now, for the first time in years, there's children born on Six Nations reserves that their first language is Mohawk. And he says that's the goal. But if you keep doing immersion in schools, he didn't have firm numbers on this, but he told me, I don't think I'm breaking his confidence here. When I was there visiting, he was just telling me where these different people, the different students are in that room when I was sitting in this classroom. And he says, oh, this one's from Akwesasne. She went to that freedom school, but now she's forgotten it. So he says, I get a lot of them coming here from Akwesasne, from that freedom school that never attained fluency. And now when they come back here, they have a bit of a base. They have more of a base than my average student, but they didn't get all the way across the touchdown. And whatever that is, but there's levels, of course. And he used that ACTFL, those markers for determining capabilities. Anyway, he says that they come into the program and they're not able to fully have a complete discussion or conversation anymore. But his program brings them back up to speed, and then they learn a bit more, and then the idea then is that they and he says he's trained a number of teachers that are now in their immersion school at elementary schools, and he says they have surpassed me as speakers, because I'm stuck here teaching perpetually teaching beginner Mohawk to them. When they leave the classroom and they go into the classroom, they get to interact with elders. Elders are in the classroom with them, and so they've now surpassed me in my speaking abilities. So anyway, I think that I think that's the route, because we've tried in Chiging here a couple of times immersion programs, and they haven't gone they haven't gotten the results that were anticipated, and then also the language programming in the school is still not getting anywhere, and it isn't. There's a lot of different reasons. It ain't just the teachers, but there, as you know, there's a lot of different reasons it doesn't work. But I think if there's a conscious effort by young people to actually become fluent, because one of the things, like, people will ask me, well, you could speak? And I said, no, I started to learn when I first was conceived. And at that time, there isn't the plethora of stuff that's out there now. When I was learning this, I was photocopying stuff, and I was, like I said, doing tape to tape stuff, and there just wasn't, and the courses that were out there were basically rote memorization courses. And this is the actual pedagogy has gone further ahead now. People have learned more about how to teach in immersion style. And I said, and you need, and my wife, of course, when you start off right off the bat and you got 3 kids, there's really not much time left to try and learn a language. So, as of course Rochelle knows, but the that's the other reality, is actually trying to learn while you're. So the idea, what he's doing, what he has done, Brian, is the young people learn it first and then have kids. That's the ideal situation, and then they speak to their kids in the home, and then that reestablishes intergenerational transmission, which is the true marker of the health of a language, if it's being transmitted intergenerationally. And anyway, that's what isn't happening in this area, anyway, that I can tell.
I was fortunate too to hear Brian speak at a conference or meeting, and was really amazed by the sort of systematic approach that he has, and that methodology was able to really break it down and say, I'm sure I'll get these numbers wrong, but they say something like, if you learn, 400 initials and 100 medials and 300 finals, like, you will be an intermediate speaker. And I'm like, well, that just sounds easy. So let's just do that. Like, what are we doing, you guys? And so it was really amazing. Yeah.
I mean, that letter to the office of the commissioner, I think he had 4 things listed there. One was local control. He called it local control, but that's not the right name for it. Basically, he said that universities are fine, and band administration offices are fine, and local schools are fine. But the ones that actually should be in charge are the ones that are actually learning and doing it. He says, whenever these other 3 institutions are in charge and hold the purse strings, it never goes good. You end up losing the control, and then they end up having other criteria that has to be funding, whatever it's funding criteria or whatever it is, and then it always throws a monkey wrench into things. And I've heard Keller Pap and Anton say that as well. Keller, especially about Wadukadadi, that they're not part of their tribe anymore, and they're not part of their school board. They're a charter school, but they're not. They get their own funding, and they're not supervised by whoever. And so they do have, of course, criteria and everything, but the ones that are primarily concerned with language revitalization that are in control, not ones that say they are but aren't really engaged. So that's one of the things that he advocated at Brian. The other thing was, of course, this root method. I know his other fellow, his friend is a mutual friend, Tim Thompson. And this fellow, Tim Thompson, is from Wata. And they had a Wata adult immersion program for Mohawk. And then these guys got, it created a lot of, it sounds like it created a lot of hard feelings against the elders, because these two guys, a couple of other guys, went rogue in a sense. So this was an immersion program for the year, and then the elders were teaching the way they usually teach, and Tim and Brian were both like, "We're not going to learn this way. This is we've done this already. It doesn't get us anywhere. We need something new." And then the way Brian told me, he met a Mohawk linguist named Chris Maracle, apparently no relation or distant relation. But this Chris Maracle was the one who was a linguist, and he was the one who come up with all those morphemes. And then Brian read that thesis and he said, "This is the way I'm going to learn." And then him and Chris kind of talked a bit about more about morphology, and then Brian put that program together. So it's using, and he says, this is the key thing that he says in there, that Brian Maracle, to that letter. This, in its way, teaches, when you use the morphemes, it teaches the students how to think the way a speaker would think, to put things together and describe things, rather than picking a whole word out of some compartment in your mind. You're actually picking the components that you would then quickly assemble. And this is the part that, I've read different studies about our immersion programming or about language programming, and I felt that they were they kind of had this bias of what they were going to say, and you already knew that at the end what the conclusion was going to be was that Indigenous languages support identity, and Indigenous languages help in a different thought process, even though the kid isn't fluent, and even though the kid doesn't acquire a significant amount of language. But that seemed to be almost the paper's foregone conclusion, that we're strengthening identity and that we're strengthening some kind of cognitive process. But what Brian's actually talking about, that's the actual thing that is sought, but that isn't actually provided here, that I see anyway, at this particular point in our education journey, the Anishinaabe education journey. It isn't really provided. So we still get a lot of, even me, like I have a lot of English syntax. I'm not, I never say I am. I just use what I can, and then, but a lot of different things I am able to deduce just by having learned a lot of morphemes and stuff, and spent time with them. But the part is that's the part that gets over-reported in the literature, the education literature, to make it sound like these kids now have this wonderful cognitive ability because they've been exposed to Ojibwe. The real cognitive ability would be if they started speaking in it, and then you would see how they frame their thoughts, and that how it would be really different. So, and this comes back to my example of you could just say what those smells. Did the smells arrive yet? And that's just a real, did they arrive yet? And that's almost like a two-legged, or but when you say something like bindigek kujawewak, then that's indicates definitively that they're swimming, they're paddling, and it's a total different thing of how we put the word together to describe what's going on. And again, it goes back to that whether myself gi big kendan mag gi nick kendan. Did I come to know it, or did I end up learning it from that point? Is the or give Mick Kenton? That's the other part that. So those are the other parts of the process that we actually don't get, and those are just using full words, Kenton, and just adding those adverbs, I mean the preverbs at the beginning. But with the morphology thing, that's when you're actually putting things together and you get a whole different outlook and process on it as well. And now, thankfully, like you look at that Anishinaabemowin online dictionary, and this is the cool thing about technology, but it might have its drawbacks eventually because it might make it too easy. If you just enter in BIIJ in Anishinaabemowin online dictionary, then you just get a bunch of words and you got your morphology right there. So then you could pick and choose, oh, this is what I'm going to do, or BIID, then you get all these words. And so you can come up with that. But why I wonder if it's a good thing, it is a good thing. It's a good tool. But what I'm wondering is if somebody's going to actually be able to use that to internalize that, or if they're just going to keep relying on that and not internalize it. So the goal is these are tools. You still have to internalize the language to communicate with each other. But what I find now is our default setting here anyway seems to be giving Anishinaabe names to our programming, our cultural programming or our gathering. And then people ask things like, well, how do I say snow snake gathering? And then so people actually don't look up to what was that actual name of that snow snake before. And some people just end up making a word. And I saw that. And one said, Gonka Genebik. And I was like, Gonka Genebik. Like, if at least if you're going to do it, wouldn't it just be Gonka Genebik? But anyway, Gonka, of course, as you know, means there's lots of snow. And then Genebik. But I don't think that that's what that word was for. I don't know the word. I'm just saying it. I don't think but I'm pretty sure that's not what the word would have been. And it's you throw that thing. So there, it probably has webige in its word somewhere on how you would do that. But anyway, that's the thing. To me, that's not an Anishinaabe thought process that went into naming that. They just went with the literal thing. The other one that I harp on is this. The Metro Toronto Zoo made this fact sheet of different turtles and reptiles and amphibians, and they just farmed it out to somebody to translate this thing. So then it says Western painted turtle, and so they actually put on there the Anishinaabe word of that is Epingishmuk Peshak Shakabigazat Mishike, and that's literally the Western painted turtle. And it's like, no, that's not that's actually Musquatese. Why don't you just say Musquatese? And then the soft shelled turtle is Enoch Caucasus Mikanok Mashike. And it's like Mikanok and Mashikan, but anyway, that name is Dedepkanok for that soft shelled turtle. Anyway, people don't do research is what I'm saying. They don't look up what's these old words for these. We have words for the majority of these indigenous birds and animals here.
That was so great. I really liked hearing about, taking inspiration from other languages and what they're doing. Because obviously each of us learners doesn't have time to try out everything ourselves. And so looking to what others have done, even if they're not in the same language or even language group, because, Kanyageha and Anishinaabemowin, even though they're not related, they do both have this kind of word part option and taking inspiration from how they used it to develop a learning model is really cool, and very specific. Like there's so many languages that are like that, sort of polysynthetic languages in our territory in the Americas, maybe we'll say. So I thought that was really cool hearing about how those pioneers kind of started this root word method, I think they call it. And so it's nice to take a little time to reflect on, how we might incorporate things like that into Anishinaabemowin. My dream, once my kids are grown, maybe that'll be my next adventure.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Now that language is a part of my professional work, it's part of what I try to formulate my life so that I can have more language in it. And so that sort of means you make that transition from doing whatever it is that your career was originally and finding a career while working in the language, largely motivated by the fact that I just want more language in my life. And so what that means then is, administering programs and helping community. And I choose to work I'm able to work in the community to do community programs. But there's this really interesting tension behind, yeah, people that will say, well, we're not going to look at how other communities do this because we want to do it our own way. And that there's sometimes is some pushbacks, from not wanting to see our relationship maybe with other Indigenous language communities, like where you live, Rochelle, where you're close to the Mohawk and learning community and the people that are in that. Over here in the Northwest region in Manitoba, we have great successes in Cree language communities, which of course is a related language in our language family. But internationally, there's always lots of comparisons with other Indigenous languages of the Americas and how they were able to do it, and not necessarily saying we have to replicate it completely, because the realities every community is different. Everyone has social issues and realities of the people, and there's so many things that influence language learning. But certainly that there's tools that we can work collectively to try to all strive to these same goals of which is language use ultimately with our children, ultimately in families, and ultimately intergenerationally. That's the ultimate goal.
Mhm. Yeah, and I feel like sometimes we're also really nervous about trying new things. So I had this a lot when I was starting out because, for people who haven't, been here before or aren't familiar with my story, I was not um, an intermediate speaker. I was a very beginner learner when I started using it with my kids. And so a lot of people really worried about what I was doing and that I was doing too much language with the kids, that I was going to teach them something wrong or that kind of thing. And so I remember kind of worrying because you don't want to go against other people and especially speakers. Um, but I saw this guy on the internet who was like going to he was raising his kid using Klingon from Star Trek. And I was like, well, I mean, there's more Anishinaabe speakers than Klingon speakers. Like,
At least it's not
we'll have
Klingon.
more of a community, at least, right now.
Yeah.
And just sort of taking a step back and being like, well, maybe I'll just try it. Even if like a lot of people don't think that what I'm doing is like right, it's at least something. And it was something that I could do. I didn't have to go and ask an organization for funding. I didn't have to get a piece of paper. I just, had to might work really hard and cry a lot, but it was worth a shot. And I feel like that was really empowering and something that sometimes our younger learners don't hear enough. That like, you know, let's try what you want to try. Let us know what you need, because yeah, like Alan said, maybe they have a great idea in doing things that we can't even imagine possible right now. Like I imagine when Brian and Tim were starting out that people couldn't even imagine what would come from that little experiment, that they would have this sort of growing community now where graduates of the program are raising kids in the language, where like, yeah, I mentioned in the last episode that I've been able to sit in a meeting where, a whole room full of, I'll say young people, but like 20s, 30s, 40s people, are just using the language, talking. Like it wasn't a lesson. They were just having a meeting and they just decided to do it in the language because that's what they're used to speaking with each other. Um, I can't imagine that when they were having those tensions starting out, that that any of them imagined that this might be possible from that seed.
For sure. I mean, I think I loved this the lessons that he really highlighted, and this idea and this even this concept, right? That all this energy and focus is on schools and teaching kids in schools, and that we have to do that. That's like the only hope, right? Is to put all of our energy into teaching in schools, but that even our Mohawk relatives even talk about that that's not the only solution, that they decided to focus on these young adult learners, of course, to make teachers and to create the next, and for hopefully them to become parents, and hopefully this, matchmaking secret strategy that was all a part of it, that was interesting. And that, but that the hopes that then they would be having families and children, and then they would be able to parent in the language, I think is a really interesting concept that certainly flies in the face of sort of these standardized concepts around how to teach language and focusing on the kids. But also, what I really loved was that they also talked about the idea that you can't just have it become a school-based language. That can't be the only place that the language is spoken. And so I remember hearing a little bit about all the great things that happen in that community, but that a real strong focus through their ceremonial spaces, through public speaking opportunities, that those are given to those young speakers. And so that is a natural progression in their journey. Not only are they given the language in the school, but they're given a platform in the community to use it. And I think that to me is that was one of those aha moments where I said, oh, this isn't about just studying verbs and learning conjugations and then talking in a classroom. You need to platform and be platformed as a learner, given opportunity to use the language in a public format.
Mhm.
And that is what puts the language back in the community.
Yeah, the other thing that really sort of about the teaching and taking it out of the schools is that, talking about that letter or yeah, the letter that Brian was putting out there to the commissioner about his sort of advice and things like that, and really that idea of putting it in the hands of the people who are doing it. Because I do feel like language is really important to everyone, and often we want everyone to have a say, but it means often that it ends up back again with, you know, the band or universities or school boards and that kind of thing. And I think Alan exactly said this, like, yeah, there's lots of things that can improve in those spheres, but if we want that long-term increase and that return to intergenerational transmission, we also have to put some of that in the hands of the people who are doing the work, who are learning and who understand the challenges. That was a really inspiring idea, and hopefully it gets picked up by more funding bodies. Just give us the money, please.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's complicated, the way programs are funded in Canada, the way these school systems are really created in the models of teaching European language, right? Like they model teaching the language in schools against the way that French is taught, at least in Manitoba, and it's just not working. And so to think about what's the Anishinaabe way of doing these things, and that the speakers are doing everything that they can
Mhm.
to pass this along, and it's the systems that are failing not just them but our children and the next generation, and the systems for funding the languages, the systems for the schools. And so it takes some revolutionary thought to throw everything out the window and a million people telling you that you're doing it wrong, and then all of a sudden you're in a room with a bunch of 25-year-olds just talking about spreadsheets in the language or whatever it is that they were talking about in that meeting. It is inspiring,
Mhm.
and it's good to know that change is possible, and that it just takes working together and collective energy.
Mhm. But I really appreciate hearing that, and it's giving me more ideas for the future.
We're all doing our best. Yeah, we're all trying to
Mhm.
contribute in some way. And same thing, podcasts aren't going to save the language. It's one little podcast, but this is part of a collective energy.
Mhm.
And Pat talks about this as her 100-year plan, right? Everyone has a role. Everyone has something that they can do. And so it's exciting to think about what a future could look like, just with more people working on the language and the amount of people doing it now as compared to 10 years ago. It is exciting.
Yeah, and learning from those who came before us and those doing it in other places. Um, but I think with that, we'll wrap up this episode. And again, this is episode 3 of 4 from our interview with Alan Corbiere. So come back next episode for our final installment. This has been Anishinaabemowin Word Parts, written and produced by Danae and Rochelle.
A big miigwech to all the language teachers who have helped us along our learning journey. We hope we've represented the language well, and apologies to everyone for all the errors we made in this episode.
For every episode, we consult our favorite resources, Anishinaabemowin Online Dictionary, the Ojibwe People's Dictionary, Gukwam's Language, and Anishinaabemowin Reference Grammar.
For more information about the podcast or resources used in this episode, check out our webpage and social media.
Graphic design by Christy Belcourt. Artwork by Christy Belcourt and Norman Allen. Miigwech!
Miigwech!